It's 10 o'clock. Today is Tuesday, the 10th of July. Welcome to our Weber County Commission meeting. Seated to my immediate right is Commissioner Scott Jenkins. I'm Commissioner Jim Harvey, and excused today is Commissioner James Ebert. Our invocation today will be given by the Weber County Information Technology Manager Director, Quinn Fowers. The Pledge of Allegiance will be given by Chad Meyerhofer, and I'll give the thought of the day. Mr. Fowers.
Father in heaven, we're thankful for this beautiful day, and we're thankful for the opportunity that we have to attend commission meeting. And Father, we're thankful for the public servants in our county, our commissioners and law enforcement and emergency services. We ask that you may bless them and protect them, bless them for their many sacrifices. And we ask that thy spirit might be with us today and with our county leaders as they do business, that they will be guided and directed. And again, we're thankful for the opportunity that we have to be here, and we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
All rise. Repeat the pledge after me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We need to send Chad Meyerhofer to the Vince Lombardi School of Timeliness. We'll make sure he does that. The thought today is by Ted Koppel. Aspire to decency. Practice civility towards one another. Admire and emulate ethical behavior wherever you find it. Apply a rigid standard of morality to your lives, and if, periodically, you fail, as you surely will, adjust your lives, not the standards. I thought that was, Commissioner, rather a good one for today. We'll move on to item E of our agenda, which is a presentation by Miss Lucy Jordan. It's an update from the Utah Geological Survey, or the UGS, on the Ogden Valley hydrology study. She's a hydrologist from the Utah Geological Survey. Ms. Jordan, welcome.
Hi, thanks. I don't get to say the Pledge of Allegiance very often, so I was impressed that I actually remembered that. When you're in grade school and you say that every single day, I guess it gets in your brain. So I'm really pleased to be here. Thanks for everybody coming.
Lucy, could you speak into the microphone?
Just pull it back that way is fine. Yeah.
Is this all right, or do you
That's great.
Either way. All right, so my name is Lucy Jordan. I'm a hydrogeologist for the Utah Geological Survey. I have been working on this Ogden Valley study for a couple of years. We had a couple of years, well, actually, it's 3 years in the making now. So I was invited here to just take a few minutes, a 15-minute presentation on where we are with the study. And I wanted to show you a couple of the maybe more relevant bits for water users and residents of Ogden Valley and planners and people that make decisions, which will be some information about our septic tank density information that we've compiled and the water budget, so exactly how much water there might be there. So because this is a quick little presentation, I won't go into all the background of the study. So if you haven't been following along with the previous, I came to a planning commission meeting about a year ago, which we did about a 45-minute presentation, which had a lot of information in it. I'll have to skip a lot of that. I just wanted to show these a couple of things that might be interesting to more people. So, we forward. Okay, so I've got slides. Hopefully you guys can see those. I think they have been published as well, so you can look at them later. But this is a map of our study area. Sorry. So this is Ogden Valley. Y'all know where that is. We've got, we looked at the entire drainage basin, not just the valley fill, which previous studies had looked at. The red outline is the drainage basin. So all the forks of the Ogden River flow down from the mountains into Pineview Reservoir. The outline around the valley floor, it's in brown, if you can see it. That's the outline of where the valley fill is. That's the outline where the valley fill aquifer resides. And then the kind of tannish shading around Pineview Reservoir is the outline of where the principal confining unit is. And I'll talk a little bit about where, how important that is for the groundwater environment. On the side there is just a couple of bullets about why we did this. It's a big study. We wanted to use chemistry, environmental isotopes, water levels, stream gauging, and existing data to really understand the interaction, the interplay between surface water and groundwater. Also to estimate a water budget, and we wanted to break that down into the sub-basins. And that's primarily for water rights, so that they can have some information to make decisions on whether they allow exchanges, whether they allow more water rights to be developed there. And then we're also asked to evaluate impacts to water quality from the number of septic tanks that are in the valley. So I'm just going to touch on those things today. So here's a cartoon showing how we think that the groundwater system works. So we've got mountains surrounding the valley, and then, does this have a pointer on it? Maybe this? Yeah, can't really see it. That's right. So around the outskirts of the valley is your primary recharge area. So any rain that falls there or any streams that run over that part, it's a gravel aquifer. So that water can actually get down into the groundwater system. Then once it flows towards the center of the valley and hits that little dashed line around Pineview Reservoir, and you can see the little thing labeled confining unit, that water has to split and go one of two ways, the groundwater. So it can either go down into the confined aquifer, which eventually flows to the Ogden City well field, or it has to stay on top of that confining unit and becomes part of the shallow, unconfined aquifer, which is eventually flows to Pineview Reservoir. So that's generally how we see the aquifer system working in Ogden Valley. So I talked about the importance of this confining unit. We spent quite a bit of time trying to understand just where it is and how thick it is. This picture shows the top surface and the bottom surface of this confining unit. So we did this by looking at well logs and correlating the different clay layers that are in the well logs. So the top surface, the one that goes from red at high elevation to blue at low elevation, is what we think where the top of this is confining unit is. So this is looking from the southwest, kind of obliquely, if you were able to just look at that confining unit. The greenish layer surface is what we think is the bottom of that confining unit. So in between there is a silty, clayey unit that basically protects that underlying aquifer. The reason I showed this is because you can see the outline of Pineview Reservoir is that gray polygon. And you can see that underneath that, where that reservoir is, that confining unit is thinner, right? It's been eroded. The top of that unit has been eroded down, and that's why the three forks of the Ogden River eroded that before the reservoir was put in place. And so where those, in the bottom of the reservoir, the confining unit is actually quite a bit thinner than it is on those two peninsulas. So that becomes important when we talk about interplay between those between the reservoir and the confined aquifer. So this is a groundwater potentiometric map. It's important to know what your water level is in your wells, and then you plot those up and make a surface out of those. And so the lines on there represent lines of equal elevation on the water table or on the potentiometric surface. And why we do that is to understand groundwater flow. So groundwater flow is perpendicular to those lines. So you can think of it as flowing from high elevation to low elevation. And in Ogden Valley, because we have the Ogden City well field pumping a great deal of water from underneath the confined aquifer, that is actually the low spot in the aquifer, in the principal aquifer in Ogden Valley. So groundwater flows toward that sink in the principal aquifer. All right, so those are kind of the background slides. So I wanted to touch on a couple of things that I think are important to understand how these aquifers interact with each other. This first one is it uses the stable isotopes of water, and I won't go into like how those all work, but basically stable isotopes can give you like a signature of where that water came from. If that water was recharged on the valley floor or recharged from streams that are flowing across the valley, it'll have a certain ratio of stable isotopes on the water molecule. And that ratio for the surface water dominated, that ratio will be somewhere in this valley anyway, around -118. That's just a number. So we sampled lots of springs, lots of wells, lots of surface water, and found that this kind of shallower surface water system has that kind of ratio. And what you'll see on the graph on the left is plotting well depths versus distance to the valley margin. So don't worry about that top axis, but the dots on the left chart represent wells and the depth of the well. So you can see that the dots that are kind of shallower than 100 feet, they're all blue. So what that's saying is the wells that we sampled that are less than 100 feet have the same kind of signature as your surface water, as your streams. So what that tells us is that that's a really active system. Those shallow wells are receiving water from the streams, and the groundwater in that shallow system interacts with those streams. The deeper that you go, you'll get a lighter ratio, so a more negative number, and we're showing that in these kind of warmer orange colors. And so that ratio is lighter like that because that water was recharged higher in the mountains at a higher elevation, or because it was recharged long ago when the climate was colder, like in the last glacial maximum. So wells that are deeper than about 100 feet have more of that type of water. So that's a longer flow path, a bedrock recharge flow path. So we see that across, the wells on the left-hand side are only the North Fork. We actually looked at that for the other two areas too and see it across the valley with some scatter. But what's very interesting is the Ogden City well field. So that's shown, all right, so the little circle that just appeared is where the Ogden City well field is on that peninsula that's between the North Fork arm and the Middle Fork arm of Pine Ridge Reservoir. Those wells, when we sampled those wells, they give a isotope signature that's kind of that deeper water. It's kind of those orange colors you can see. They're pretty deep wells, so we would expect those, if everything was kind of just running in kind of a perfect world, those would have a really old signature water or high elevation. But we actually found that they contain tritium. Now, tritium is a radioactive element. It's a tiny, tiny, tiny amount, so there's absolutely no danger. But what tritium in groundwater tells us is that water that we're pulling out of those wells has been at the surface sometime after 1950. So if tritium was put into the atmosphere when above ground nuclear testing was taking place in the 50s and 60s. And so surface water, streams, they all contain tritium. And we were really surprised to find that the Ogden City well field, those wells contained some tritium. So the question is, it's got kind of this old bedrock recharge pattern to it, the stable isotopes. It's got, we also did age dating, it's got some older water in it as well. But it also contains tritium. So what that's saying to us is that there's a couple of different pathways that water can be getting to that well, to those wells. Do I have another? And we've hypothesized 3 different pathways. There's really no way to tell the difference between them, but this is kind of a cutout view. We've got the well field in there. We could either be having, it's not really that far from the Ogden City, or the peninsula where that is, over to, say, the mountains to the west of the reservoir. So we could maybe have some water recharging at the surface there and actually making it down into the wells, you know, on the decades kind of time scale. You could have water actually leaking down through that confining unit. We call it a confining unit, and it does. It actually makes pressure. There used to be a bunch of artesian wells at where the bottom of the reservoir is now. It was called Artesian Park, and it was the city water source for Ogden City. Like 48 wells or something, and they were plugged in the 1930s before they installed the dam in the reservoir. So that confined unit was putting that confined aquifer under pressure. So we know it does a good job of keeping water down in there, but like I said, where it's been eroded by the 3 forks of the river, it's in some place only probably about 30 or 40 feet thick. So you've got a silty clay layer, trying to hold back, you know, quite a bit of water above it. So if you put a strong pressure gradient there by having a large extraction field, you can create a gradient that could maybe pull water down through the reservoir through that confining unit, or from the shallow and confined aquifer to the confining unit. So there's those 2 pathways, and then, as I mentioned, there's all those old wells. So they were plugged in the 30s, and that's a long time ago, and we don't know the status of those plugs anymore. So there were well casings, they put material in them to plug them, but that's been 80 years. So there's a possibility that some of those plugs could have maybe corroded, and we could have water going down through those old well casings and getting reservoir water or shallow unconfined aquifer water into the confined aquifer.
Ms. Jordan?
Yes.
Question from Commissioner
Yes.
Jenkins.
So the question I have, when you talk about the pressure forcing this water into that, of course, that's the pressure of the water that's stagnant on top of it at the dam, right?
No, so the pressure that's in the confined aquifer at the location of the Ogden City well field, or in the confined aquifer in general, that's actually pressure that's formed from the pressure of the rest of the water that's up above it, which is off the side. So anywhere that confining unit isn't, so in the valley margins where there is no confining unit.
So none of that
No.
pressure comes from the pressure of the water above it in the dam, huh?
So before the dam was put in there, those wells did have enough pressure to flow.
Right.
Since the dam was put there, and I have slides, but I don't think we're going to have time to get to them. We've actually analyzed the water level of a well in Huntsville, and the level of the water level in the reservoir, and that does have an impact. So that water in the reservoir pushes on that confined aquifer and can actually make the water level in the well go up and down with the level of the...
Right, and I suspect that. So that was my whole point.
Okay.
So if some of that water you were talking about flows down through that and recharges into this second aquifer, doesn't that in effect act like a filter? I mean, there's nothing wrong with what you're describing, is there?
Yeah, as far as water quality goes,
Right.
It would act, I think, as a filter for organics. You wouldn't be able to get any kind of organics through that kind of layer. What we do see, in addition to tritium being in that well, it's got a little bit elevated nitrate, and I say elevated meaning 1.4. So it's still a really low level of nitrate, but it's higher than the average of the other wells in the principal aquifer. So
What does that tell you?
that tells us that it's getting some water in a pretty quick way from somewhere that has some nitrate influence, either farmland or septic tanks. So
Yeah, and you don't think that's through the dam itself, run off into the streams that go into that dam?
into the reservoir?
The reservoir?
Yeah, I mean, it could be. That's what I'm saying, is that it could either be
Okay.
reservoir water that's getting down, but if it's coming through those abandoned well casings, it could go through the well casings, and then it has to go through some amount of aquifer to get to the other wells, right? So that acts as a filter. So you're good there. If it comes down through that confining layer, yeah, that acts as a filter for...
Okay,
For-
that's all
yeah,
I wanted to
yeah.
establish.
Yeah.
So in my mind, I understood.
Yeah, I get... groundwater scientists get really caught up in like how groundwater is flowing, right? And so these clues are really interesting to us, and I have to make sure I'm not alarming people saying, you know, that near surface water can be getting into their well supply. Ogden City also, of course, treats and monitors for all of this stuff. So anyway, so that I wanted to show that just because it's showing how our aquifer system is working there. All right.
How deep are the Ogden City wells?
I think the deepest is, well, here it's on the side there. And this is depth below the water table, and the water table there is like 30 to 80 feet, depending on if they're pumping or not. So they would be about 200 to 500 feet, I think some of the deeper wells are. Is there an Ogden City person here that would know that? And they're below this at least 30 feet of confining unit. So, all right, so I think that's what I was going to talk about on that. Now I wanted to move into water budget, because I'm kind of moving up on our time slot here. This is a slide showing what we believe are kind of the proportions of where water's coming for recharge and where water is going as a discharge. And this is for the groundwater system. So a lot of times you think about water budgets as a whole for the water system, for the watershed. They talk more about surface water, but we are actually looking at the groundwater here. So I know it's hard to read, but on the left is the recharge. This is for 2016, which was a pretty typical year. And what we came up with is about 67,000 acre-feet of water per year is interacting with the groundwater system. About, maybe a third of that is coming from in-place recharge, which is just rain falling on the land surface and making its way through. And that's on the valley floor. And then maybe not quite a third, maybe a fourth is from the mountains. That's actually landing on the mountains and making its way down through to get to the groundwater system there. And then the orange slice there is losing streams. So this is quite a bit bigger from some of the other more arid valleys that we've worked in. So, maybe, I don't know what, that's not a fourth. A fifth of the water is coming as you're losing streams from the streams that are running over the valley floor. And then some minor components, and then discharge is overwhelmingly discharge from the groundwater system to Pineview Reservoir. And that's probably mostly through that shallow and confined aquifer. But then there may be some that's actually making its way up through that confining unit too. And the other two bigger components there are base flow to streams. That's the groundwater system is actually losing water into its streams. And the gray one is the Ogden City well field. So Ogden City's pulling about a sixth of the water that's available in the valley. And then water rights is one of the things water rights does, the Division of Water Rights, is allow water to be moved around within the valley. And so they were interested in knowing how these different sub-watersheds play a role in the overall budget of the valley. And so what we looked at is we separated the valley into the North Fork, Middle Fork, and South Fork sub-basins, sub-watersheds, and did a little water budget for each of those. And so this is that slide. The three different areas are separated by the black line. So you can see that the South Fork has the most available water, which makes sense because it's got the biggest surface area, and it also has quite a bit of mountainous terrain. So it has maybe like 63,000 acre-feet of water and we call the available water is precip minus ET. So it's basically after the plants use what they're going to use, what's actually going to be able to be used get into the groundwater system and be used downstream. North Fork, you see, is about 50. Middle Fork is about 46,000 acre-feet. And then we did some more calculations to try to figure out how much is stream flow versus groundwater flow. And so we've got about 33,000 acre-feet coming into the reservoir as surface flow from the North Fork, about 12,000 acre-feet coming into the reservoir as groundwater flow. And then the Middle Fork is the 23 surface water and 15 groundwater, so kind of equal-ish. And then the South Fork, we think, is actually more dominated by surface water flow. We've got 57,000 acre-feet coming in as surface flow into the reservoir from the South Fork drainage, and only about 7 as groundwater flow. And that's the groundwater flow numbers are pretty vague because there's no surface water divide that we can draw a line on a map. So we just had to kind of partition it by area. So that's lower there because there's less area for that groundwater flow to go into the reservoir, if that makes sense. There's also kind of a transfer of water out of the South Fork drainage into the Middle Fork in the Ogden Valley Canal or the Causey Canal. And then the outflow, we think, is primarily from the river water going down, either down Ogden River or used by the treatment plant that's pulled out of the reservoir, or the irrigation water that's pulled out of the reservoir. So that equates to about 125,000 acre-feet. And then the Ogden City well field's about 11,000. So it's kind of gives you an overall picture of how we have partitioned out the available water into these different areas. And then the last thing I want to talk about is the septic tank density study that we did. So Mike Lowe, who was my boss for many years, who's now retired from UGS, is in the back there. He and one of my other colleagues did a study back in the 90s. It was actually using 1980s data and 1990s data. So we just updated that. We did the same method, basically, but used updated numbers and updated flow. It's a mass balance approach. I'm not going to kind of go into how that is, but basically if you add septic tanks, you're adding nitrate, because nitrate comes from your septic tanks, and then you have a certain amount of groundwater flow that's moving past those septic tanks, and that dilutes it, right? And so a question becomes for developers and for cities who need to regulate these things, like how many septic tanks can we add to our basin before we start impacting water in a negative way that we don't find acceptable? So we've done a bunch of these studies. In some other places, people have said we would allow 1 milligram per liter nitrate increase as your average nitrate. So in this valley, using nitrate concentrations from kind of that shallow sort of surface water dominated flow path that I showed you, where we think most of the water is actually moving through. If you use those wells and springs that are in that kind of zone, and then wells that are in the shallow unconfined aquifer, which people aren't actually using that water, but there are some wells in there that we were able to get data from. USU did a study. If we average those values, which is what we think is kind of the active zone where septic tank leachate has to be diluted, we come up with an average value of almost 1.5 milligrams per liter nitrate. So the drinking water standard that the EPA sets is 10 milligrams per liter nitrate. So well below that. We'll point out, though, that that's the average. And so you do have some wells. We sampled a well that had about 7 milligrams per liter nitrate. There's a couple of 5 and a few 3s. So there are some areas, obviously, that have higher nitrate and some that have really low nitrate. So if you average all that, you get about a little bit less than 1.5. So that's kind of our starting value. And so if you say, yeah, I'm okay with kind of our average coming up by 1 milligram per liter, that allows us to build more houses and have them on septic tanks, then we did a couple scenarios, and just for time's sake, I'm not going to go through Ogden Valley is unique because there's a certain population that lives there year-round, and then there are a lot of second homes, right? There are a lot of cabins, there are a lot of ski condos. Some of those are on lagoon systems, which we aren't including in this because that nitrate is contained. But anything that is on septic tanks, we figured out there's probably about 2,200 septic tanks in this valley fill area. If you just take the number of permanent residents and you divide it by the number of developed parcels, which we got from Weaver County, you get that there's only 1.7 people per household on average. That's really low. Like normally across Utah and in Weber County specifically, the average is 3 people per household. So we think that permanent residence is underestimating the number of people that is actually contributing to the nitrate load in the valley. So we did do an analysis with 1.7, which is what the data say it has to be, right? But if you add in that maybe some of those second homes are used maybe 50% of the time, we just took a guess. Let's say they're used 50% of the time. If you do that math, you get 2.4 people per household. So let's do a little scenario using 2.4 people per household. So we're starting at this kind of 1.5 level, and we can go up in this gray area. So if you first, let's see, what am I going to do first? Oops. No, I didn't want to do that. All right, so if you take 2.4 per people per household, and then you just build more houses and put them on septic tanks, you can probably get to about 4.4 acres per household, per septic tank. And so that you might want to limit your lot sizes to 4.4 if you feel like you only want to have 1 milligram per liter degradation across the board as your average. I would caution to not do that because we can't, if once you build the houses, you might have 3 people in them per household, right? So instead, maybe a better way to do this is to go and put 3 people, fill up all the houses that you have right now to 3 people per household, and then start adding more septic tanks from there. So when you do that, you add more and more septic tanks, you add like another 2,000 septic tanks, and you get to, if you take the area that you have, divide that by the number of septic tanks you have there, that's a density of about 5.8 acres per septic tank. So if you were to develop the land that's available there and limit it to an average of about 6 acres per septic tank, this is kind of what we think maybe would happen if you did that. And then another way to do, so let's leave it at that. So I think that's probably a pretty realistic, as far as we can go. There's some problems with this method, but as far as we know, if we were able to build houses in there and put them on septic tanks, you might want to kind of limit your number of development to 6 acres per household. That's putting them on septic tanks. Now, if you go with a sewer, that's a different way to do it. So, and you wouldn't have that same loading. So that's kind of what I wanted to show on that. And I think, so that's all I was going to say about that. And then I just had a list of what will be involved with the study, the final product. Did anybody have any questions on that septic tank stuff before I end? Yes, Miranda.
Firstly, thank you for doing this study, and we appreciate all your hard work. We appreciate the funding from the county commissioners to get this study done. We think it's very important. My name is Miranda Menzies. I'm with the Wolf Creek Water and Sewer Improvement District. So we have a sewer plant, which allows us to have higher density. But my question is, if you show on that previous slide, if you skip back one, you're showing a preferred density of 3.5 acres per septic tank or more. So the fact that we have our pretty standard zoning of agricultural value 3 is 3 acres per house, that seems like a reasonable number, and we should not consider going anything more dense without affecting our groundwater quality.
I would say that's not very protective, the 3.5, because that's assuming that your growth continues at 1.7 people per household. Okay. So if you're going to put in place, that so many of the houses have to be second homes, which I don't know if there's even a mechanism to do that. If you believe the Ogden Valley is never going to be a more typical kind of residency where you have people living there year round in all those homes, then you could maybe get away with that. But that's why I didn't even go through that scenario, because I don't think that's really a reasonable scenario for the long term. And once you've got a house there on a septic tank, it's it's harder to hook them up to sewer, right? So that's why I went through the 2.4. So you're really at about 2, because the 1.7 is only those current residents that are living there full time on the number of houses that they have. If you just continue that, and it's ignoring any of those second homeowners or any of that recreational use that comes into the valley at different times of the year. So, yes.
I'm Ben Hollish from Liberty.
Commissioners,
Correctly.
excuse me, we'll have to ask your questions at the podium.
Let's, we're recording this, and so if from those from the crowd, if you'll come to the mic, and that'll just help us be compliant. Thank you.
If I understand correctly, the nitrate loading that you're talking about here affects not only the residents of Ogden Valley, but also those who are supplied out of those wells and the reverse osmosis. That nitrate loading affects everybody downstream, is that correct?
So when I showed the Ogden City well field and how that has tritium in it, has a little bit of nitrate in it, what that's telling us is that not all of that shallow water is just going to the reservoir. Some of it is actually going in. That's how the confined aquifer gets its recharge, right? It's from some of that shallow zone too. So nitrate can travel through the confined aquifer to the Ogden City well field. It also ends up in the reservoir, in Pine Tree Reservoir. Now the nitrate level in the Pine Tree Reservoir is low because it has so much clean surface water coming into it. But yes, in effect, all those septic tanks that are, especially the ones that are on top of the shallow unconfined aquifer, so underlying Huntsville and kind of the southern part of Eden, anything kind of right around the reservoir, that nitrate then eventually makes it into the reservoir. So you're lucky in that you have a lot of surface water coming in to dilute all of that. But it does add to the overall nitrate load in the reservoir. So any water users that are using reservoir water or confined aquifer water, yeah, they are impacted. So, okay, yeah, that's just kind of a list of what we're going to do. So where we are with the study now is I've gotten comments back from the stakeholders and some internal review. And so I'm just making those edits. I'm hoping to give it to my boss and my editorial section in about a month. And then I can try to push it through fast, but that editorial process takes quite a bit of time. So it'll be a few months before it's actually published.
Ms. Jordan?
Yes.
You presented some great information today with a lot of graphs and cartoons and things. Where can this body go to see those and study those a little more in depth? I see the geology.utah.gov. Is there a more specific site that we can put on our website so people can access and view your presentation, even maybe more in depth than what you've presented? Can you tell us where that is, please?
So I sent this, I think the slides that went into your packets, Charlie, where's Charlie? He said he was going to put that up on the Weber County Planning website, I think. So that packet would be in there. There's also the packet from last year's Planning Commission meeting. I think that's available. As far as the survey's webpage, we're not releasing anything that hasn't been given out in a public talk like this because it's still in draft form. So,
what I'd like to do is when it's not in draft, just have the audience know that we will follow through on the Weber County Planning website to make sure that this report is visible or open to them to be able to see this. We want this absolutely to be public knowledge and for people to dissect and study on their own and then be able to ask questions.
And when it's published, because we're a state organization, all of our publications are available on our website, and they're just a link. You can download them, you can look at them online. But that, like I said, that'll be after it's through our editorial process, so it'll be a few months coming. But yeah, that's available there, and so maybe the best thing to do is for Weber County to link to that.
That's what we'll do.
Okay.
Very good. Commissioner Jenkins?
Well, you had another hand. Go ahead
Okay.
first.
Mr. Waldrop?
Sorry, I've used up 40 minutes of your time.
That's great. Thank you.
Steve Waldrop from Eden. This is awkward. One other issue, and maybe this has been considered in here, maybe not yet, is agriculture and livestock contribution to the nitrates. How do you have any sense of how that? I'm assuming is the home residency. You know, the development grows, the livestock and ag goes down. How does that interplay work going forward in your model? Is that considered in there?
So basically what he's saying is when you convert farmland to homes with septic tanks on them, you have some trade-off of your the nitrate that would come from agriculture, either from farm animals, from the manure, or from artificial fertilizer. And so we haven't done any kind of like mass balance on that. USU, the mention that I had in here was the shallow aquifer water. They put wells into that shallow aquifer and sampled them. They did a lot of work on agriculture versus septic tanks. And so there's a thesis, there's about 5 papers that have been published on it. So they took a pretty in-depth look, so I would kind of point you to that. They did think that some of the nitrate that's in the system now is from agriculture. We had some questions about how they used corn as their crop, which there isn't a lot of corn growing up there. So we feel like the main contributor is the septic tanks now, and so I think because how the farmland is being used up there, it's mostly alfalfa hay. There's going to be, it's not going to be an equal trade, probably. That's what I'd say. Is that what you think, Mike? Okay. Okay.
Are there any other questions, ma'am?
Sorry.
Great.
Yes, my question is not
Can
about
you
the
state your name, please?
Oh, sorry. My name's Kim Arby, and I live in Eden.
Thank you.
And my question is not about the septic tanks, but about the wells that you presented earlier. I'd like to know how many wells you studied and how many wells that you found that were deeper than 200 feet. Because most of our wells are shallow, 40 feet to 200 feet. Thank you.
I don't know those numbers off the top of my head, so I'm going to my slide. Oh no, do I not have it in there? Huh. I guess oh, there it is. That's it. Okay, so on the side here, we sampled 57 wells for general chemistry, which is kind of your main nutrients in there. A subset of those for filtered metals, so arsenic, zinc, some of those metals. Nutrients, which includes nitrate, was 43 samples. And some of the environmental isotopes, the expensive ones, we did 11. The water isotopes, which is the graph I showed with the Ogden City well field, the stable isotopes, we collected 224 samples of those. So really, that was a really helpful piece of the study. The depths of those, I would say that they were probably less than 10% of them were deeper than 200 feet. There just aren't that many deeper wells up there. So really, we sampled a pretty good subset, a cross-section of the types of wells that are there. You know, we didn't focus on deep ones, we didn't focus on shallow ones. So I would say that this chemistry represents pretty well what's being used up there.
Pretty well?
Pretty well.
Just when I thought I was getting it.
Yes.
Okay.
It's a good sampling.
Here we go.
Zane Frohr, Mountain Canal. In your report, you show seepage or leakage. I'd like to know how you measured that. How do you determine that? And then the second question would go back to the Sorry about the fog. The artesian, being an old valley boy from the crowd here, Jim. It seems to me there was a lot of pressure built from the layer, and I can't think right now, but the canal seepage in that. I'll get back to you.
I think I maybe understand what you're talking about. So let's talk about canal seepage. I wanted to show this slide, but I didn't think I'd have enough time, but now that I'm just taking up the entire meeting, I'll just go ahead and talk about it. So sorry about that. So we did a seepage run on the Ogden Valley Canal this summer on July 19th of 2016. And so we measured flow in the canal, and then we documented and measured any takeouts from that, any turns. So we think we did a good job at quantifying what was going in and out of the canal on that day. And then we also had Weber Basin Conservancy District measures several places along the canal. We compared those measurements, or took those measurements where we didn't have a measurement. But the four that we did have, where we'd measured it and Weber Basin had also measured it, we were within 10% of those measurements. So we feel pretty good about the data. I'm hoping we didn't miss something in a turnout that wasn't visible to our field team. So qualifying all of that, this is kind of what we found out, is that along that canal, where the red parts are is where the canal is losing water, where the blue parts are where it's gaining water. And so overall, from the start where it's taken off the South Fork to the end, which is kind of over by the highway that goes up to Powder Mountain, we think, so on that day, that start was at 38, I think it was 38 acre-feet, or no, 32. And with those 23 measurements that we took along there, at the end, I think we had 6. So am I doing my math right? Anyway, there was 18 cubic feet per second of loss along that canal. That's not takeoffs for irrigation, because we accounted for those. So that could actually be plants in the canal using that as well, but it's just water that's not being actually taken off for use. So that's the number we got. It's high. I was really surprised, because that's half of the flow of the canal. And so what we did then is just took that ratio and applied that to the whole volume that was used in 2016 that was diverted off at the takeoff from South Fork. And so that over a course of a year equates to about 3,300 acre-feet of water that's being lost from that canal.
Ms. Jordan, we have a question from Commissioner Jenkins.
Well, I have several, but you just brought up a good point. So on this Ogden Valley Canal, you could make a pretty good argument for lining that canal if they're losing half their water. Okay, the question I had that I wanted to ask you was nitrates on the South Fork. Did you measure that at all? Because in the past, I've been told, and just told, that there's a fair amount of those septic systems on there that are very close to the river.
Yeah. Yes, we did measure. We did take samples from South Fork for nutrients, and I can't remember the hard number on it, but everything that was surface water, if you averaged all of our surface water measurements, it was like the nitrate was like 0.5 milligrams per liter, and I don't recall any of the surface water samples being even above 1, maybe not even that high. So we didn't find any. There's a lot of dilution, right?
Sure.
It's causing, gets water let down.
That.
So, yeah.
Okay, second question is, when you jump from 1.7 to 2.4, that's just simply shooting at a number, right?
Yeah. So we did document how we did that. So the 1.7 is the number of permanent residents from the 2015 census, which was like 7,800 people or something. And then divide that by the number of developed parcels. So from Weber County, if they classified it as a developed parcel, we figured that was that had a septic tank on it. We did subtract the areas that are on lagoons. So it's the number of developed parcels that don't have a lagoon system. So that's how you get 1.7. So we got to 2.4 by taking those number of people, those 1,700 people, and put them into houses at 3 people per household. So that is...
Okay, right there.
Yeah.
You went to 1.7 to 3.
Yep.
Why 3? Why did you
3
pick
is
that number?
the Weber County average.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So your assumption is that they will develop up there the same as Weber County does. And as I look at that, I look at the Upper Valley as more recreation. Many families live there and then their children move out because they can't afford to live up there. You're up to 3 acres up there for development, so it becomes much more expensive to live. And I question your assumption of 2.4.
Well,
Now,
okay.
if you'd have said 2.0, 2.1, maybe 1.9,
Yeah.
I'd have been a little more on board. But
Okay.
2.4, I question.
So I'll continue on how we did this, and maybe this is too big of a number. So people that are living up there now, we assume they were at 3 people per household, which I think is pretty reasonable, right? People have families. Overall, the population that's living there full time is maybe typical. No, maybe not. And then those households are full. And then all of the rest of the households that are on developing parcels, we said that they were occupied at 50% of the time. So if there's any better data out there to say how often those second homes or those cabins are used, we could definitely adjust that number too.
I would like to, I'm not a real estate specialist, but most second homes are not just second homes, but for some are third or fourth homes, depending on where they are. And that number, when you said 50% occupancy, for me is a concern. For those I do know who have multiple homes, who have second homes, whether it's in the Upper Valley or Bear Lake or Island Park or wherever it is, they don't occupy them 50% of the time, and I think that's very generous for you to.
How about
extremely generous?
The other part that we were trying to add in there was the non that aren't actually going to a second home, all the recreation. So like the parks and the campgrounds and stuff, does that maybe bump that kind of seasonal use or that part-time use up a little bit?
Some of those, though, are all contained. Those restrooms around the dam are all self-contained.
So they're pumped
by the Forest Service. Yeah. We had another question from this gentleman.
So we can make that lower.
I think it's green. I'm colorblind, but we're going to call that a green shirt.
Teal.
Jim Richardson, Mountain Canal Irrigation, and about 4 years ago we had a big discussion with Weber Basin concerning the leakage on our canal, and at that point, we just had a lot of discussions, but we basically confirmed what you found. But for your information, there are plans in place to pipe that. So that plan is going forward, and the design is being done this year, actually. So with that in place, if that becomes a zero seepage along that line, your recharge for that system is going to dramatically change. So maybe you could address that.
Excuse me, before you leave, when do you think that will come to fruition?
Oh, I'm sure the actual piping being done is years down the road, because it's a huge project that will impact all the owners and distributors.
Don't mean to paint you into a corner, but when you say years, is that 5 years, 10 years, 50 years?
They haven't given us a time frame.
Okay.
I can only tell you that the study is supposed to be done, this summer?
They're doing engineering work on design right now as we meet with them.
Okay, thank you.
That's only engineering.
Thank you.
So what would probably happen then is that makes that what's seepage now, makes that more available to the users. So it would be sent out to the users to actually be applied to the farms, so you could grow more or whatnot. So there's still going to be some amount of irrigation that's applied that doesn't get used by the plants and ends up as recharge. But yeah, probably recharge would go down a little bit because the usage would go up more. Beneficial use.
Very good. Is there any more questions for Ms. Jordan? Thank you, Ms. Jordan, for your presentation. No, we appreciate that. Some great information. We appreciate that. By virtue that we have an audience today, Commissioner Jenkins and I have talked. On our agenda, we're going to adjust our agenda. Item number H is for public comments. For those of you who are here who would like to make some public comments, please come to the microphone, state your name and where you're from. Limit your comments to 3 minutes. We'll go with item number H, public comments now. None being recognized, we'll move on with our commission agenda. Thank you for those who have attended.
You offer public comments and they all got up and laughed.
That's okay.
Good job. Let's go.
Very good. We'll move on to item F, Commissioner, on our consent items. This is a request for approval of warrants 1491 and 429790 and 429960, or should I say including those numbers, in the amount of $1,054,328.88. Item number 2 on our agenda is a request for approval of purchase orders in the amount of $61,224.57. Item 3 is a request for approval of minutes for meetings held on June 26, 2018 and July 3rd, 2018. And item 4 is a request for approval of a new business license. Commissioner, any questions?
None.
None being recognized. Mr. Hatch, would you please give us a little more of the audience some detail?
You bet. You bet. We issued 14 acre-feet of purchase orders for $61,000. Did anyone get that joke? Okay, never mind. 34% of that amount, or $21,000, was for the health department, and that will go towards vaccines. 17%, or $10,000, is for the gun range, and that is for storage containers. And 16%, or $10,000, is server maintenance and backups for the IT department. We issued 172 checks for $1.1 million. 55% of that amount, or $582,000, was corridor preservation, and that was entirely for the 2600 North Ogden project. 13%, or $133,000, is for the 2550 South construction project. And then 10%, or $100,000, was for fleet, and that was for the purchase of 2 trucks.
Very good. Does that prompt any questions? Yes, sir, Commissioner Jenkins?
The acre-feet of water. Can you explain where that was going and give me a little detail there?
It was a lame attempt at a joke.
It's not funny.
Oh, that was either well given or terribly received. I'm sorry.
Good. Except for that, are there any other questions, Commissioner? I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve. I'll second that motion for the consent items. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Consent items are passed. We're going to move on to item G, or action items. Ms. Stewart, you have the next 2 items. The first one is a request for approval of a local transportation funding agreement by and between Weber County and Marriott-Slaterville City for the 1200 West project. Ms. Stewart?
Thank you, Commissioners, and thank you for having me this morning.
Will you pull that mic a little closer, please? Thank you.
Is that better?
That's it for me.
Here we go. Yes, before you today, for your consideration, is a local transportation funding agreement for the 1200 West project in Marriott-Slaterville. The project is seeking to widen 0.6 miles of 1200 West. That's beginning at 400 North, going north to the far west city boundary, which ends approximately 86 feet just before Bill Bailey Drive. So this project will allow for travel lanes in both directions, a center turn lane, curb and gutter, sewer and storm drain improvements, sidewalks on both sides of the street, and will also include signals at the intersection of 400 North and 1200 West. The BDO has donated a 30-foot buffer from the edge of the right-of-way, which will allow for the project to include a meandering trail with lights on the one side of the street. So the total cost of the total project cost is estimated to weigh a little over $6.7 million, and they have received a little over $3.7 million from WFRC and STP funds. So they are requesting $3,017,190, which was recommended for approval by WACOG on December 4th, 2017, and also included in the 2017 priority list that was approved by the Commission on December 12th, 2017.
Very good. Commissioner Jenkins, any questions?
No questions. I've reviewed this with Brooke and I'm satisfied. I question the light, but I know that time's coming when it'll be needed, so they're getting ahead of it a little. So motion to approve.
Got a motion to approve, and I'll second that motion. Call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Item number 2 is a request for approval of a local transportation funding agreement by and between Weber County and Marriott-Slaterville for the Pioneer Road Phase 1 project. Ms. Stewart?
Yeah, this is phase 1 of Pioneer Road. They're intending to improve the road by enlarging the radius, the turning radius, which will improve the design speed and raise the road and improve the bridge over the Warren Canal. That'll help with the future closures that they have from the flooding out there. So these improvements will also bring the roadway into compliance with the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials Geometric Design Standards. So in 2015, this project was awarded $250,000 in corridor preservation funds and a little over $1.9 million in sales tax funds to realign this first phase of 2 phases along that Pioneer Road. And in 2017, Marriott-Slaterville submitted a second request to seek additional funds due to some unexpected recommendations that came out of the geotechnical report and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. They are requesting that they include a retaining wall and some over-excavation. So they're requesting an additional $246,000 in corridor preservation funds, $902,918 in sales tax funds for those unexpected charges. Though that recommendation was approved by WACOG December 4th, 2017, and was also included on the same priority list as the project before, which was December 12th, 2017, that was approved by the County Commission.
Thank you, Ms. Stewart. Commissioner, any questions on this one for Pioneer Road?
I drive Pioneer Road every day. I really like that windy, funky little road, and they're trying to straighten it out.
There've been people trying to straighten you out for a long time.
It's true. It's hard to do. Anyway, no, I'm just fine with it. I'm going to hold my nose and vote for it. So I'd make a motion to approve.
I accept motion and second it. I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Stewart.
Thank you.
Item number 3 is going to be presented by Shelley Hallisey. It's a request for approval of a resolution of the County Commissioners of Weber County appointing members to the Ogden Valley Park Service Area Board. Ms. Hallisey.
Thank you, Commissioners. Huntsville Park entered into an interlocal agreement with the Ogden Valley Park Service Area in May. This finalized the process to bring all 3 parks, Huntsville, Eden, and Liberty, together. 3 board members resigned and 3 new board members need to be appointed. The vacancies have been posted in accordance to the state statute. We've received 4 applications that you have before you. We need to go through appoint 2 out of the 3 applications that don't include the Huntsville portion, and we'll bring that portion back at a later date.
Very good. Said good, Mr. Barron? That any questions from you or legal?
No questions from me. That's just because the current recommended individual from Huntsville doesn't live within the boundaries of the district. And so we need to go back to Huntsville and ask them to pick a new candidate who lives within the boundaries of the district to comply with the appointment process.
And one of those seats on that board is appointed by Huntsville or recommended by Huntsville Township or city?
Not pursuant to statute, but pursuant to an interlocal agreement between the district and Huntsville. Huntsville does get to recommend one of the seats to the board.
So in clarification, our role today is, because they are looking for a couple of appointments to fill immediately, is we need to recommend 2 names for that area board. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct.
Very good. Commissioner, I've reviewed the applications. I'm sure you've taken some time. Do you have comments on that?
Ready to make a motion?
Very good. I'll entertain a motion.
I'd make a motion that we appoint Gregory Graves and Victoria Malmberg.
It's Resolution 31.
Resolution 31 is to appoint Gregory Graves and Victoria Malmberg to that Ogden Valley Park Service Area. No more questions. Fatima, if you'll call for the vote, please.
Chair Jenkins.
Aye.
And Chair Harvey.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. Item number 4 is a request for approval of the final reading of an ordinance of the County Commissioners of Weber County, adding a provision to the purchasing code. Miss Cedarholm.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
We're almost afternoon. So this is just the second reading of the ordinance that we discussed last week. And just to fill those in who aren't aware of it, we are just adding in a provision that will allow us to recontract with a contractor, engineer, or architect who worked with us previously on a construction project, and that we need to now come back to that project and do some additional work. The stipulations on that they have to have done the work within the last the project has to have been done within the last 5 years, and that we made a change per Commissioner Jenkins' request that the new contract amount not exceed 10% of the original contract. So
I like that.
So I met with Brianna, and we talked. I told her I would really like it if that contract had to be returned back to the commissioners, and if we could add that. And she says it was already in there.
yeah, so anytime, according to our purchasing ordinance as it is right now, you would either get reapprove the purchase of the new contract through a purchase order or another contract, depending on the dollar amounts. This type of work would most likely always come back to you through another contract. So they would have to write another construction contract with the engineer or the general contractor. It would come before you guys to be approved again.
Questions, Commissioner?
No, I'm ready to make a motion.
I'm just going to say I'm ready to entertain a motion.
Good, I'd make a motion we pass this.
Great. I have a second on that.
It is ordinance 8.
Ordinance number 8. Okay, I'll call Fatima. Go ahead.
Commissioner Jenkins.
Aye.
And Chair Harvey.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cedarholm. The next two items on our agenda are items number 5 and 6 under our action items, which is by Mr. Burton. Number 5 is a request for approval of a contract by and between Weber County and Michael Crookston for an agreement and escrow for the remaining improvements to be installed in the Elk Ridge Estates Cluster subdivision. Mr. Burton.
Hello, Commissioners.
Good morning.
I guess usually you see a subdivision improvement agreement on a new subdivision. This is on an existing subdivision. A little bit of background on this one. It was platted and recorded back in 2007. The improvements were not put in, so in 2009 the county called on the letter of credit that was established to get the funds to put in the rest of the improvements, and the funds were not there. And so the county placed a notice of non-compliance on this subdivision, and no lots were able to be sold until it has been removed. The person who's bought the property from the bank has put up an escrow amount of $37,329.60, and that's for the remaining improvements. This item, along with number 7, they're related, but this specifically is to approve the improvement agreement in that amount.
Very good, Commissioner. Any questions?
I do. How do funds get removed from escrow?
From the county?
Mm-hmm.
Once he has installed these improvements.
No, I meant on the ones that you said you went to seize before and they weren't there.
It's because we didn't require the actual funds back then. We allowed for a letter of credit.
Oh, okay. So the individual who had the original development knew full well that we were going to come and take the development at that point.
I can't answer that. I apologize.
But,
I don't know.
Well, that's asking for your thought, but it seems to be logical,
right?
That's his thinking. All right, thank you.
Commissioner, I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
I have a motion and a second. Call all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Mr. Burton, item number 6 is a request for approval of a contract by and between Weber County and Saddleback Development, LLC, for an agreement for the improvements to be installed within Sunset Equestrian Cluster Subdivision, Phase 1. Can you just, for me again, remind me of that, the bearings on that or the approximate address, please?
Sure. apologize. Usually, and again, this is looking at another improvement agreement. Usually with a subdivision like this, we would schedule final approval with the county commission and approval of the improvement agreement. The final approval of the subdivision, for whatever reason, did not make it on today's agenda, so we're just discussing the improvement agreement. But yeah, the location of the subdivision is, let's see, 4075 West, 2200 South in the Taylor area.
Super.
So right now we'd just be discussing and I guess approving the improvement agreement in the amount of $1,204,004.86. That is for the improvements to be installed within the subdivision. I'll likely bring back the final approval of the subdivision next week for you to consider.
Commissioner, questions?
None.
Great, I entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
Motion and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Burton.
The next item is Chad Meyerhofer has asked that
I was going to ask Sean to come, but if you're going to do that for him, he gives me the thumbs up back there.
Yes.
So it's the item number 7 is a request for approval of release of notice of non-compliance and suspension of final plat approval.
As I mentioned in the item number 5 for Elk Ridge subdivision, the one that the developer didn't put up the money and we called for it and we couldn't get it. Now that we have it, the engineering division has put together a release of notice of non-compliance for this subdivision, and that's what's before you.
Very good. You feel good about that, Mr. Burton?
Yes, we do. Chad and I have looked over the improvements and feel that they are the money is sufficient to cover the remaining improvements.
Very good. Any questions? Chair will entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
Motion recognized and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. Item number 8 is a discussion and or action on nominations for UTA board members. Let me just, for the audience that's here, tell you that there was a process that included details described by the Senate bill that was passed by the legislature reorganizing UTA. I can affirm to you that Weber County, along with Davis County and the input from Box Elder County, have met those obligations and requirements set forth by the legislature. We have met collectively together with representation in posted open meetings laws. The 3 commissions, again, Box Elder, Davis, and Weber counties have met in conjunction with, and we need to also thank Andrew Gruber and his staff from WFRC to help facilitate these UTA appointments. The position was noticed for nearly 6 weeks, where we received applicants. Those applicants were vetted and interviewed, and from that, the 2 applicants that came to the top, or the cream that rose to the top, were applicants Beth Holbrook and Brett Milburn. So those are the 2 names that we present for this body to formally move forward to the governor's office in conjunction, and we will do this. We've committed to the Davis County Commission and the Box Elder County Commission, who are meeting right now at the same time in their respective counties and doing the same thing that we are. So requesting a motion that we forward the names of Brett Milburn and Beth Holbrook to the governor for the UTA board.
So moved.
Okay, very good. Motion seconded. If there's no more discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That motion carries. Thank you. Having entertained H earlier in our commission agenda, I'll entertain a motion for I. None being heard, the chair will close the meeting. We are now adjourned. Thank you.